Imagine this day, yeah? Jumped out of bed, right? Found a tenner on the floor. Guess what I said, right? Today should be a remarkable day. I remember how I said it, because I said it that way. Left the apartment, girl on my arm, yeah? Sun's in the sky and it's working a charm, yeah? Got some ice cream with that tenner that I found, right? Gave the change to the dude sitting on the ground, right? There was a car coming down, yeah? Heading straight to the spot where the dude was on the ground. I heard a crash, but then I noticed that the dude was over there. Sitting on the coffee bar with coffee in the air.
You're amazing. Like, the tenacity, like the fact that you're even here today already tells me so much about you. Like, the fact that you've shown up for a resilience training or emotional core strength seminar already says you've gone through a lot, you've remained sensitive, you've experienced life deeply, and you're finding it difficult at times, and you're willing to show up and make yourself vulnerable again, potentially to receive something that might help you through the rest of this. And that says a lot to me, and I love you guys for that. So thank you again. One thing that came up a lot in the questionnaire was the fields of work that you're doing as well. You'll be surprised how many of you are in community development, in the social services, in social change, and artists trying to create social change. That's like 90% of participants here today are working in the social services, community development, and the arts. So again, that says a lot. It tells me that it takes a certain type of person, a certain type of heart to be able to remain on that coalface, to stay there and not back away into other potential jobs, other potential things that we could be doing with our lives. So we've got activists here, we've got social workers, we've got foster parents, we've got people in education and the health services. And this is why I do this work, is because I'm also in that space. And I spent many years working with youth, with Indigenous communities, with child soldiers who have just recently moved to Townsville, or with the third generation migrants who are still finding it difficult to settle in. So I've done this sort of work for many years, and I have experienced and shared other people's experiences, and it has broken me over and over again. So I know what it's like at times, how lonely it can feel, how isolated it might feel when we have this vision of a world that we want to live in, and it just seems so far away, because we can cast out incredible imaginings, but the reality is that this world evolves slowly and gradually, and it's taking us a very long time to get to that place that we want to be, so it can be painful. So recently I decided to move a bit more energy towards actually assisting and supporting my colleagues and comrades. I still work in social change and community development, but I also feel that I had a few things that I had learned along the way that I'd like to share with you guys. And that's kind of why I created these seminars, the Unfazed series. Something else you might notice as a commonality, if you look around yourself, you'll be able to tell very quickly something that's different about this particular audience. And see if you can just yell it out, whoever works it out first. There you go. Mostly women, that's exactly right. That's not fluke. There's a reason for that. It's not to say men don't need resilience or support. It's showing us where we're at currently. We live in a world where men as young boys were never really shown, taught, or had any really real leadership to look towards as far as how to express emotions, how to receive love, how to show care. It was always bottled up. It was, things like don't cry and don't be a girl, and these are things that still kind of go on. So being emotionally expressive was not something that came naturally to men, and it seems to be shifting now. The energies of civilization is now shifting. We are moving towards a more balanced state of being, where up until now we've lived in a very patriarchal society. Force and aggression and power and military might have ruled, and now that's shifting. So more and more those of us who identify with a male body are beginning to embody what we have referred to as feminine qualities. Fact is, what I believe is that the soul, which is attached to a body for a particular period of time, is actually genderless. And this particular physical form is given the gender male, female, and a host of other genders as well, just for us to have a particular experience in a particular lifetime. But the soul that animates this, the consciousness behind it, is completely genderless. So much of my own personal spiritual journey has been to embody both of what we have called masculine and feminine in order for a fully realized human consciousness to begin to emerge, hopefully towards the end of my life, perhaps. We'll see how far I get. But yes, there are a great deal of female identifying persons in the room. And even in the social services, social change, community development work, again, you'll notice an overwhelming majority of women in those services, in those groups. There's 6 people in here who have never experienced a panic attack. That's something else that I thought I'd raise. So if you're feeling like you're alone, you're not. I like pointing that out to people. We often feel like we're the only ones, and it's not just this room of people, it's everywhere, wherever you go. Any room you ask it in, if people are brave enough and feel that they can answer that question without having to face someone and put it in a questionnaire, most people will tell you the same thing. And that's something we should try and remember day to day. In those moments when we are having a panic attack, that it's, good chances that 98% of the population has had one. And when you're not, that others are also going through that as well. Because when we are able to help people through that which we have gone through, it makes a little bit more sense to us. It gives us a bit more purpose. And the next time we're going through something tough, we have faith and trust in humanity and in ourselves, because we know that at that point in time when someone else was going through something, we were able to offer them some sort of assistance or support. And then when we experience that ourselves, we are more likely to actually reach out to someone and trust that potentially they might help us because we once did that for someone else. And it's part of our own healing as well. This is part of my healing, you being here. By having these seminars, I also learn each time I go through this with you as well. Some of you might know this. I don't prepare a speech. I don't prepare even dot points. Today, I'm literally just taking the stage and speaking to you whatever comes to me in the moment. And every seminar that I host is completely different from the previous one and from the next one. So some of you actually have come back from the last one I did in November. You'll notice it'll be a whole different thing. For me, if I was to have certain points that I needed to get across to you, or if I had like a schedule of items or a format of how to be resilient, it'd be dead. It'd be flat. It'd be lifeless. And I would just be speaking at you. So what I do is I go through those questionnaires, read those responses, get a vibe for who's about to be in this space, and then I tune in. And I have Amy help us with the breathwork session to try and get a bit more connected, and then I vibe off of you. And I try and guide the seminar with the energy that I'm feeling and just speaking whatever comes to me. Resilience is often mistaken for hardiness. Or being tough, like if you can go through stuff and be tough about it. But that's a lie. The fact of the matter is, if you harden up against life, life will break you. It's the branch that sways in the wind that will remain alive, and if you remain rigid, you'll get cracked. And sometimes life needs to hit us hard enough to actually crack us, and there's a point in that as well. Breaking the heart open, making us feel on a level much deeper than we have before. But generally, resilience is not about being tough or hard or emotionless or expressionless, which is what we have told our children for many generations. Resilience is Mother Nature. Resilience is the capacity to receive, transmute, and respond, to evolve, to not become warped and twisted, but to remain gentle and soft and allow life to occur to you, for you to experience it and choose consciously how you'd like to respond to it. When we are in trauma, when we are experiencing high stress or heartbreak, one of our responses is that we harden and we close. And those of you who have recently experienced heartache or a seriously traumatic experience might remember that your field of vision literally decreases. Your senses are less useful to you when you're stressed, whether it's in a martial arts practice or in life in general. So if you're walking around through life and you're feeling hurt or carrying pain within you, you're less present because your field of vision is decreased and a lot more of your energy is actually going inwards. You'll notice people who are particularly heartbroken in public, their gaze will even be lower, their shoulders will be slightly over, and oftentimes there's a phone in front of them, or even without the phone, there's a sense of being slightly more closed, and we're experiencing less of life. In that state, we're not just less aware of ourselves and our environments, we're actually less aware of others in our presence. And we're more likely to cause harm in those states. So every trial and tribulation we've gone through, every horror that humanity has witnessed throughout the centuries and thousands of years, has come about through lack of awareness, whether it's been the way we've treated animals, whether it's the fact that we had slavery, whether it's the way the system has disrespected women. These have all been through lack of awareness. And as our awareness increases, we call it our level of consciousness, we become kinder, more gentle, more understanding. So on a personal level, the same thing applies. And again, this is why this work is so, so important to me. Because eventually, something hurts us so deeply that the thought of it happening to someone else keeps us up at night and it breaks our hearts. And we do whatever we can to try and help such a person or to stop such a thing ever happening again. And every time I've been hurt in my life, or every hurt I've seen anyone else experience, has been through the perpetrator's lack of awareness. Whether it's heartache or the fact that we slaughter animals to eat them. It's a lack of awareness. When we become aware of what happens in those slaughterhouses, when we become aware of our surroundings and that there's another conscious being in front of us who has feelings and that our actions might actually hurt them like we've been hurt, when we are aware of those things, we're less likely to hurt each other. So what I'm actually asking myself to do and hoping that I might be able to help others to do is to become magicians and wizards and witches and mages to practice transmutation. For thousands of years, alchemists tried to convert copper into gold, thinking that was the greatest transmutation there could be because the gold was so valuable to us. That's how limited our mind frame was. Fact of the matter is, the ability to turn darkness into light is our greatest power. To turn hurt and pain and receive blows and to have the resilience and strength to remain calm, to breathe through it, to not react from that hurt, to transmute that and create beautiful art with it or show kindness in return, that is the greatest power we have as conscious human beings with free will. We can justify our responses. We can say that person did such and such thing to me and that hurt me, and we are well within our rights to say that. No one can say, no, you have no right to be hurt or upset. It's just a choice that we have. And I'd like to make as many people aware that this choice does exist, and it is one of the most glorious things to practice. To receive a blow and to return kindness, or at the very least not return hatred, to not live in fear because of that blow, and potentially create something to help others through what you have or have not gone through. I have a friend, his name is Bobby Azami. He was a child in Iran who escaped to the US with his family, and he is a survivor of child sexual abuse. After many years, he finally expressed his story publicly, told his family, and created a theatre show, a one-person theatre show that starts from his childhood in Iran to US, to his experiences there, and then to his travels to Australia, and how he started his organisation, Will Not Rest. That right there is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's transmutation. He gets up on that stage and he speaks about something that is possibly one of the darkest things that we could potentially imagine in our minds, and he does it with such joy and grace and laughter and lightness within him that it you can witness hearts healing right in front of you. And it's from his resilience. It's from his ability to not receive that hatred, that blow, that injustice, and let that affect him negatively, but for him to sit down and put all those hours and months into actually creating a one-person show so he can speak up on the stage to audiences about how we need to have these conversations about protecting our children, how we need to remove the taboo, how we need to be able to change the law so that if a certain period of time passes, you can still press charges instead of there being the statute of limitations where you can't press charges after a certain period of time has passed. Like, these are conversations we need to have, and it takes brave people like Bobby to get up on a stage, share his story, so enough people can have that conversation and change that law, change that function within our society. So resilience for me is about developing our capacity for transmutation. I feel like that might actually be the purpose of our existence. The reason why we have consciousness might be just that. We know that the universe is mostly dark. There's less light than dark throughout the galaxies. And we might just be the only conscious beings that we know of so far that have that potential to take dark and create light. So it's about social change. It's about mental health. It's about community development, and it's about our own personal health, but it's also about, potentially, it might just connect back to the purpose of our actual existence. What stops us? What gets in the way of this process of transmutation is this protective shell that we have, that we call the ego. It's a protection. It's what receives the blow. It was a mechanism instilled in us to self-preserve so that we wouldn't kill ourselves with fire or fall off the edge of cliffs or to run from an animal that might kill us. Fear. So the ego identifies very strongly with fear. And what served us well in our collective childhood as a civilization is now hindering us in our adolescence period. So as we are becoming adolescents as a civilization, our fear-based responses are no longer serving us because we aren't in imminent danger. And how we used to respond to fire and woolly mammoths, we don't need to respond with that sort of aggression with spears or running to emotional stuff. And that's what's hindering us, because we use that same mechanism. We think that this is a life and death sort of situation when it's not. So if we can remain calm with that and bypass the ego, we can actually respond from a place of love. Sometimes, when life really loves us, she cracks us, like wide open, with a blow so severe that you can't help but be knocked off your feet. On a smaller level, it's panic and it's anxiety. It's these little things that the body, the consciousness is connected to the physiology. It has a little panic attack to remind you that something's not quite right. When it's really subtle, it's intuition, like you got a bad vibe about someone. When it gets a little bit stronger, it's panic, it's anxiety. And then if that's not enough, life will sometimes deal us an actual physical reality blow. Like something happens to us in physical life, not just within the physiology. And these things are often resulting in trauma. And there is a purpose to them also. Because that protective shell that I was just referring to is what covers the seed. But that shell is not your reality, it's not your truth. You are what's inside that seed. But in order for that seed to sprout and become an apple tree, that shell has to crack wide open, and whatever's inside it has to have faith to leave that behind and sprout. That is our true essence. And that shell is what is our ego. And in those moments when I have had the severest blows dealt to me, if I remain still and calm with that, if I don't respond how I have been trained to respond, I realize that the part of me that feels hurt is a story. It's part of me that's an ego. It's this idea of myself that I have. It's a covering, it's a blanket. if I remove the story, if I remove my ego, if I remove that part of me that's hurt when someone mistreats me, you can remove that. And you realize on the inside, you're infinite, eternal, everlasting. When you identify with that part of you, then you don't feel the need to protect the ego shell. And my dear friend here, Atlas, runs sessions, and he brings up this theme called state versus story that I'd like to refer to. And the fact is, we have a story and we have a state. And too often we identify with our stories more than we need to. When the fact is our state is actually calm, it's at peace. But if we're identifying with our story, then something that's happened in the past, we are still continuing to carry with us here, and because that thing might happen again, we are living in that state as if it's already happened. But if we come back to the breath, like Amy was just telling us, come back to the state that we are in that state, when we are calm, when we are aware of our surroundings, we're like, oh, cool, I'm sitting with friends at a party, or I'm on a bus that's traveling at the correct speed limit and I'm about to get to work, or whatever it might be. When we are aware of our surroundings, I'm at the beach and we're about to have a picnic, then we become calm and peaceful. When we refer back to what happened to us a month ago, 6 months ago, or 16 years ago, and we carry that with us, that's identifying with our story and reinforcing our ego. And that causes us to carry emotions that we don't necessarily have to carry in that moment. Unless we're seeing a counselor and we need to process that stuff. In that moment, then yes, we are having a conversation, a dialogue that might help us process something that we aren't able to see ourselves. So in conversation, through dialogue, we can unravel that and heal that. But if we're carrying that with us at all times and constantly referring back to our identity and our story, then we are less present with our surroundings, and we aren't serving the purpose of our existence. That story will one day fade. This dream we're in seems really real. And just like when you're asleep and you have a dream where you're surrounded by gold coins and you're stuffing them in your pockets, or you're running from a monster, or you're upset with someone and you're having a physical altercation with them in a dream, when you wake up from that, all that's remaining is how you feel about the way you responded. That's it. Like, I've had dreams when I've seen, it's been a while ago. Now, lately, in my dreams, I'm a bit more aware that I'm dreaming, and I have conversations with people, and I go on journeys, and I seek out information, and I come back, and I wake up, and I've got a little bit better understanding. But when I was younger, I remember having dreams when I'd be opening up a treasure chest and stuffing my pockets full of gold coins, and then waking up devastated that the gold coins weren't there anymore. And it would happen again and again, and each time I'd be like, okay, cool, I remember last time I woke up and it wasn't, so this time I'm going to put them inside my underpants or something. Still trying to bring the gold coins back with me, but no matter what you try, what happens in that dream state stays there. Those people, those characters, those stories, everything fades away. And all I remember waking up with is how I felt about it. And I remember feeling pretty gross. That I was in this dream state and I was aware that I could go anywhere I wanted and do whatever I wanted, but I was obsessed with these gold coins. So when I woke up, I was like, shit, that was my true nature at that time. When I was 12, I was obsessed with gold coins. At another point, I might have an argument with an older person, a family member, and I would respond in the not the nicest way. And you wake up from that dream state, you didn't actually harm that person, but you're still feeling ashamed about how you responded in that situation. And that's how I see this realm. The stories will fade. The traumas will disappear. The physical body is not your true reality, but how you feel about how you responded is all that remains. You are perfectly perfect. You are always intact. Emotionally, we've experienced things, but you are no less than you ever were. And beyond this state, you will be free of this existence, and the capacity to be able to create consciously, the capacity to be able to remove fear and replace it with love, these will develop the limbs and senses with which we will navigate our universe with once we are free of this body. So that's why I try to speak about not identifying too strongly with this vehicle that we have. and with the stories that this vehicle has gone through. And when we can stay calm, just for a moment, when we can do breath work to release tension, when we can meditate in the mornings to calm ourselves before we go out into the absurdity that's out there, when we can do these things, we're rewiring habits that have been formed over years, passed on to us from our predecessors, and we are developing capacities that will exist beyond our physical selves. When you're in it, it's hard. When you're alone, when there's not a room full of people surrounding you who have gone through similar experiences, it's hard. And there's moments where your breath is taken away, where you need to lean on something just to stand upright. And those moments, it's the work that we've done before we get to that moment that sees us through. Emotional core strength is much like physical core strength in that it takes physical exertion, energy. Like, it's not easy. I can't just list a bunch of dot points and say, if you do this, this, and this, then you'll have resilience and emotional core strength. It actually hurts. Like when you're at the gym lifting weights, you're meant to feel it through you, through your core. When you're doing your sit-ups, when you're doing your chin-ups, you're meant to feel that tightness, a little bit of pain. That way you know you're growing. Emotional core strength is exactly the same thing. In those moments when it's easy to lash out, it's like doing weights that you're not feeling anything. It's like, cool, that's how I'm going to respond because it's the easiest thing to do. But when you physically exert yourself, you're like, breathe. That's what I'm talking about when I'm speaking of actually exerting energy. Imparting a force that blocks off a usual response, and using your energy to break a chain. That's how we develop it. And each time we do it, we get a little bit better at it. So it's not just about the brain and the synapses and how we train our brains to think differently by having different thoughts and connecting different synapses here and there. But emotionally, we also become stronger the more we train ourselves to not lash out when we're upset or irritated by something, to not be worked up when you're stuck in traffic or when someone's rude to you in public. Like, these are really simple things. You know, like someone just like a bank teller or a bus driver being rude at you, get on the bus. And like we get hurt by that, and like they will oftentimes carry that and then lash it out and like that, send it out on someone else. These are really little things. Beyond that, there's some heavy things that we are dealt that we need to develop our skills to be able to deal with. And the closer we come to home, the more there is the ability to be hurt as well. So like someone can walk past me on the street and, you know, throw a racial slur at me or tell me to go back where I've come from, whatever it might be, and it's like water off a duck's back. It doesn't even, like, shh. But the closer that person is to us emotionally, the more capacity they have to potentially harm us as well. And oftentimes, it's our own physical family unit that has the capacity to test us the most and to push us to develop ourselves. And our relationships with our parents and then our siblings are there for a reason. And we can cut them off and just say, you're not healthy for me to deal with you. But it's also cutting short the option or possibility of further understanding ourselves. I subconsciously put myself in a situation where every year I have to spend 3 months living and working with my father in Townsville, full-time on a festival that he'd started 20-odd years before. And it was like, 18-hour days, day in, day out, no break, nothing else. We were living in the same space and working together. And no one on the face of this planet can infuriate me more than my father. And yet I keep stitching this into my life somehow so that I would need to go back there to be there with him. And it was only recently that I realized what I was doing. I was bringing myself as close to him as I possibly could so he could irritate me as much as he possibly could so I could learn more and more about myself each time. The things that irritate us about our parents or anyone else out in the public are parallels of something within us we wish to address. This is again why it's important to not be unkind to those who are unkind to us, or to judge others whose actions are a little bit different to us, because as different as we might think they are, if it's irritating us, it's something within us that we need to resolve. It doesn't mean we are a perpetrator of that same act, but there is something there to be addressed. And when we remain calm in those situations, when we do not judge, whether it's a vegan activist speaking to a meat eater, or whether it's an environmentalist speaking to someone who's completely unaware of their actions regarding the environment, or whatever context you might want to dream up. If we can remain calm in that situation, not only are we more effective communicators and able to actually guide them to better awareness of their actions, but we can also learn through that interaction how we can better ourselves, because there'll be a reason why that particular thing irritates us. And that calmness that we maintain allows us to see that. When we are really hurt by something, our senses, emotional abilities, as well as our physical senses diminish. And the people in this room are dealing with some really heavy stuff. We're working in social change, we're working in community development, we're working in social justice, feminism, women's rights, child protection, veganism, we're right there at the edge. And the most effective activists, the most effective speakers that I know of are those who can stare into the abyss, look right at that thing that is most painful to look at and remain calm and to speak about that issue. Whether it's child sexual violence, whether it's the slaughter of animals, whether it's feminism and women's rights movement, if we can look at these things that are breaking our hearts and to remain calm, that's when we are most effective in actually being able to address the issue. And to give you an example, in a physical altercation, if someone's accidentally cut 3 of their toes off with an axe, the person who's able to look at that and stay calm is the one who's most able to help in that situation. The person who's oh my God, that's terrible, they're not of much use. So when it comes to the sexual violence, for example, in this world, that's something that really bothers me. And it used to fire me up to such a point that I'd just see red and I would get infuriated and I wouldn't be able to think straight. The more time I spent considering that issue, the more time I spent around it, the more time I spent having conversations around it and thinking about how I could address it, the calmer I got and the clearer my thoughts became. And we have 2 options. We can get really angry and ineffective, or we can cut ourselves off completely and start distracting ourselves with life, with career, with drugs and alcohol, with whatever else we might want. But those of us who are here, we're generally more likely to be engaged with those issues. So obviously you haven't cut yourself off, but we need a little bit of a reminder that just because we're passionate about something doesn't mean we have to get worked up about it and allow the pain to shut off our senses. And James Aspey is one of my favorite vegan speakers. And he is the chillest dude you'll ever meet. Sunny Coast guy, chill as anything. And he talks about some of the most horrendous things that are happening behind the scenes in slaughterhouses and in dairy farms and whatnot. And because of his calmness and his humor while he's discussing something so painful, he's able to change people's perspectives, make people think differently, and change their habits as well. So for our own sakes, as well as to be more effective agents of change, it's important for us to identify less and less with our ego state, and more so with that part of us that exists within that shell once it's been cracked open. And those traumatic experiences that we've gone through as individuals that have really struck at our core, once we see the reason for them, once we can recognize that there was a reason why that had to happen, because now I'm more sympathetic for anyone who's gone through that also, then we start coming to a sense of peace. We're if I hadn't gone through that, I might not have been so passionate about this particular cause, a miscarriage. Up until that point, she had no idea what it felt like to lose a child. No idea. And as much as a person might try to understand that or sympathize with the person or empathize with that person, when you've gone through that, it's a whole other thing. You're able to talk with someone who's also gone through that and support them and help heal their heart as well. So these things that we've gone through as individuals in our lifetime, once we see that there was a point for it, it was to help us actually develop our connectedness with each other. Like, regardless of all of the different things there are, possibilities that we could potentially go through, we all feel the same stuff, like the same emotions. And some of us have had similar experiences. And the fact that you've had a similar experience, it means you can be of support to someone else who has also gone through that. And when we see this, it's not as dark as it was once before. When we recognize the purpose in it, what's really difficult is trying to understand why you had to go through something when there was no reason for it. Absurdity, the absurdity of life, of heartbreak, of trauma, of random accidents that take people's lives when there's no sense or purpose to it. That's what just kills us the most. When we see sense in it, when we can try and find a sense of purpose in it, which we are innately wired to do. Like, we are always looking for some form of purpose or find a reason for something. If we can do that with regards to our own experiences as a physical being on this earth, it helps us to heal the trauma and become more effective supporters of others who are going through what you have recently gone through. Why? There's only one of us in this room. It's just one entity here. And we are separated into little atoms. So we can look at the other reflections of the one self to understand what is this self standing here. For me, like, spirituality and religion and science aren't separate things. Like, some people focus on spirituality and they separate that from religion, and others have religion and separate that from spirituality or science, and others have just science. And for me, it's all the same thing. And in order for something to stand true for me, it's got to have some resonance in a spiritual sense with me, and it's also got to have some founding in science as well. I don't take just one or the other. And how I understand truth is through resonance. So those of you who remember anything from high school physics will remember waves and wavelengths. And resonance is when a wavelength meets another wavelength of exactly the same amplitude. So when a wave and another wave come across each other and their wavelengths are the same and the amplitude of the peak and the troughs are the same, that's called resonance. And what happens is those two waves double up. So whatever the amplitude was of that wave, it doubles. It goes twice as high and twice as low. But they were already exactly the same before they met. And that's what causes resonance. So who's seen that famous bridge that collapsed because of resonance in the wind? Yeah, great, cool. So what happened was that the natural resonance of the metal in that bridge happened to meet the resonance of the wind that was passing through on that particular day, and the amplitude just kept increasing until the entire bridge collapsed. But that wavelength that was in the bridge and in the wind were existing previously, and they were exactly the same. So when something feels like truth to me, and we say we feel a resonance, whether it's with someone else's energy or whether it's a line or sentence that really strikes at our core, we're like, yes. That's a definite yes, because I can feel it in my limbs and in my heart, and there's no doubt about it. I don't know why, but that's just a yes. It's because you're resonating with something. But that means that was already existing. So if there's anything that you hear today that you suddenly feel like, oh my God, that's so true, I don't know why it feels like I've already known that, it's because you already did know that. That truth is not something anyone can make up. It already existed, and you already knew it, you'd forgotten it, and you're remembering it again. And calmness is really important to me because of that. Anything that anyone can ever say that might help heal a heart, or guide a soul, or to bring peace to a troubled mind, already existed. That was a truth that was in existence that you are feeling a remembrance with. And when we are calm, these things return to us. When we are rushed, we forget those things. And I'm going to go from there to art. The reason why art is really important is because by practicing art, whether it's writing poetry, writing music or theatre or dance. We are memorizing our principles, our ideals, our cultural stories perhaps. You know what I mean? Through song and dance, we are passing down stories. Through poetry, we pass through ideals and philosophy. Through theatre, we embody particular principles and archetypes and stories. We are memorizing and embodying it. When we are calm, we know the truth. We are gentle, we are kind, we are generous. When we are safe, and we have everything we need, we are all of those things. But then when we're flustered by life, when we're rushed, when we're frustrated, when we're lacking in sleep, we forget those things and everything goes out the window and we become less kind and less generous and less patient with those around us. So art practice for me is a way of memorizing those things that we know are inherently true to us. And if you're not already practicing an art form or two, I would recommend that you do so. And if you're practicing in one or two, find a third one, another way. For me, when I write poetry, I memorize those lines and then I speak them out to an audience on a stage, and it helps me remember that thing. So next time I'm in a situation where that particular line that I knew was true, I might have forgotten, I'm less likely to forget it. There was a time when we all practiced art, whether it was through our basket weaving, through our dance, through our cave paintings, or whether it was through poetry and literature. We all had time for it. Now we do these things called jobs to pay for the power and the structure over our heads and the food that we buy packaged from the grocery shop, because we don't have time to do those things because we're busy working so we can pay for those exact same things. It's absurd. But because of that, because of these complications we've sewn into our lives, we don't have time to practice art, and only those of us who manage to be lucky enough to find an art form that is paid by others because someone else happens to like it, then those of us who do that are able to live a life practicing art, and the rest of us just stick to our day jobs. And it's terrible. It's heartbreaking to think that you have to make money to practice art, and that's the measure of the worth of that art. That art is not for anyone but your own self. The fact that someone else likes it or doesn't like it is irrelevant. It's not for them. It's just like someone saying, oh, you look particularly pretty today, or your hair smells really nice. It's not for you to judge. Like, it's not that person's place to even say how they think your physical appearance is on this particular day. Art's the same thing. It's none of their business. So the commodification of the arts, selling of albums or posters or poetry or books or whatever, is what I refer to as the prostitution of the arts. We have taken something that was sacred and we are selling it out, pieces of it, to try and pay for electricity and food. We are misusing it. And in doing so, those of us who are shy or less likely to profit monetarily from it have drawn ourselves back, and we've cut ourselves off from a beautiful form of expression and healing. The first part is to heal. And when we write things down, we can shed tears, we can release, we can express. We might be lucky enough for someone to see that and also resonate with that, like, damn, that Bon Iver song that he's speaking about those themes, I felt that as well, and that recognition can heal another person as well. But the fact is, first and foremost, it's for your own self. To A, heal, to B, express, and to C, memorize those things you know. Because in those moments when you practice art without thinking of how much this might sell for, or whether it's good enough to recite at the poetry slam, when you get rid of all of that stuff, you can write some pure stuff. And by getting it down there and getting the flow right, or the grammar right, or whatever it might be, or the colors and the tonings, you're memorizing that. And you're more likely to live by those things you already know. Now, I mentioned spirituality, religion, and science a minute ago, and I'm going to go back to that. Regardless of what system of faith you may have or don't have, regardless of whether you believe in a conscious existence or not, creator, whatever, doesn't matter. What I think really does matter is, just for a moment, suspend your beliefs and carry that idea for a short while. Some people don't like the use of the word God, and I often get people asking me, why do you use the word God in your poetry? But just the fact that I use that word doesn't mean we mean the same things. Like, literally, God does not have a gender. God doesn't have a beard. God is not a physical being. God is not outside of us. So when I refer to God, I'm not referring to what religions of the past or proponents of religions of the past have tried to make us believe. It's the idea that there is a consciousness that just might be a witness to your existence. That's it. Like the science of how the Big Bang happened and how many years we've been in this existence and how evolution has happened or not happened. I do believe in evolution, by the way, but it's beside the point. The fact that there might just be a conscious existence that is witnessed to us allows us to have conversations that we would not ever be able to have with any other being. Like that there was a witness that was there every minute and every moment that has seen everything we have seen, that has felt everything we have felt, that has witnessed everything we've experienced. Because no matter how close you are with another person, could be your parents, could be your lover, could be your child, could be your best friend, they weren't there the entire time. You were. Your consciousness was there. And to carry the thought that potentially there was another consciousness that witnessed you when you picked up the bit of litter that you didn't necessarily have to pick up, or when you sat there and you wept about the state of the world and no one was there to watch you weep. When you recognize that there might just be this person, you can have conversations that are more fluid, more open, more raw, and more honest than any other conversation you could potentially have with anyone else. So regardless of whether you believe in religion or not, just try that. And I promise you, the more energy, the more faith you put into the potentiality that there might just be a conscious observer to my existence, the more likely you are to actually feel that presence descend upon you. And I assure you, if you give it the energy it deserves, you will feel it as a response. Some of my darkest moments, some of my most painful moments are when I have those most earnest conversations. It's funny. We go through life and some people are spiritual, some people say their daily prayers, some people don't have anything at all. But even if we don't have a religion or a faith or a belief in a God, it's weird how when we are at our lowest moments, we all tend to go back to the idea that, oh shit, maybe there is. Maybe there is now. Okay, I'm willing to believe now. Even Homer Simpson was willing to believe God at his lowest moment. And in those states, we have our most honest conversations and we feel most earnestly. And in those moments when I have asked for why did I have to go through that? Why did you bring me here? Why did this have to happen? I thought I was a good person. I thought I'd done okay. Like, what did I ever do to deserve this thing? When we really, truly believe that someone might just be listening, we open up the option, the possibility of receiving a response. That's all. Meditation. In those states, when we are not busied by life, when we are not chatting about irrelevant stuff, when we're not backbiting or gossiping or busying ourselves with the daily news or at a party, when we are quiet and still, we feel what's going on here. And oftentimes it's not easy. But we need to feel that. Because if we're not feeling that, we're expressing it through our actions. It comes out eventually. Like we think that we can feel things on the inside and it doesn't have any effect if we don't talk to anyone else about it, but it's not true. Everything you're carrying inside you comes out in how you structure your sentences when you're writing poetry, how you look at someone in public, even if you just met for the first time, how you feel about other people and other contexts and other situations that you're not even there, but just like a story that someone tells you. How you feel about that is a direct reflection of what's going on in here. So we need to deal with that. We need to clean that out, dust it out. And sometimes we've learned to lock things up and things have gathered dust and things have started to fester and there's traumas in there that trigger us. When we talk about triggers, that thing triggered me or there's a trigger warning coming, we need to trigger those things. We need to keep hitting those triggers until they don't trigger us. There's a reason why it's there. And when we deal with those things, when we sit with them in meditation, when we calm down, when we stop using the alcohol, when we stop using the drugs, and we stop pretending like socializing or parties or our careers are important, when we put all that aside, and we deal with the pain and hurt that's going on in here, and we start cleaning it out, We become kinder. We become more gentle. We realize that much of what we're doing in life is trying to keep ourselves busy so we don't need to think about what's going on in here. As a civilization, look at us. We're ravaging this earth. Economy, industry, pollution, all of these things. We're just keeping ourselves busy. Keep the economy going up. Keep production going. Keep people buying more stuff. We're hurt. As an entire civilization, we're hurt. And we're trying to control things that scare us. That the patriarchy, for thousands of years, this world was mostly influenced and ruled by men through force and aggression. And we have this tendency of trying to control that which scares us. Nature. White people enslaving black people. Men suppressing women and disrespecting them. Those things that seem powerful and scary and potentially dangerous to us because we don't know how to predict them or control them, they scare us. And the more hurt we are, the more we try to control things. The more we try to bring some sense of stability to it. So we create these stories about our identity and our ego, because that's that one little piece of the universe that we can control. It's like, I remember what happened to me, and because of that, I'm like this, this, and this, and I have the right to respond to that particular experience like this because of that. Because that's like one chunk of the universe we can. That's not the best way to go through life, though. When we remove that covering, when we recognize the fact that we're hurt, and it's okay to be hurt, then we can start dealing with that, and we can slow down. And when we do, this is something I'd like for you guys to try. When you have a moment, put on some music that you really like, classical music or post-rock music or something ambient without vocals and lyrics. And put on some headphones and just stand in a busy mall one day, or a shopping centre, or Burke Street Mall, Flinders Street, Southern Cross Station, and just watch people around you. And you can feel it. You can feel how hurt people are. You can't ignore it. The busyness. And we can't keep going like that. We're destroying ourselves. Our physical bodies are deteriorating faster because of it. Our earth is suffering because of it. Nature, I mean, we've lost 65% of all living organisms in the last 60 or 70 odd years. Like, we are killing the planet, and there is no other home for us to go to. Just like the child that comes out of the womb of the mother, it's in its own world in that world, and that's its entire world. And when it comes into this world, it's like it's coming into another world. The fact is, it was always in that world and in this world already. So for me, the idea of death and birth or the afterlife or whatever, it's not another place, it's not a separate location. We are already there, but our awareness is here. Just like the baby's awareness is within that womb. And when it's born, it dies to that world, and it's born into this world in the same moment. Just like the seed that cracks open and dies and becomes something different. When we leave this realm, or when our awareness leaves this realm, we'll realize we were always here, but just our awareness was somewhere else. There's no other place to go to. This is home. There is no end in sight. There is no end to your consciousness. There is no end to this universe. So whatever you do is actually forever. Like it's reverberating through eternity. So we best calm down a little bit. Deal with what's going on here. So the butterfly effect that we create is a kinder one, a gentler one. And in that state, we'll recognize that there was never any separation to begin with. Thank you.
The dude sitting on the ground, right? There was a car coming down, yeah? Headed straight for the spot where the dude was on the ground. I heard a crash, but then I noticed that the dude was over there, sitting at the coffee bar with his coffee in the air, to salute the condition permitting of life. So nice that I had to say it twice. Salute the condition permitting of life. So nice, yes, nice. Before I was a body, I was a bunch of cells, yeah. Before I was a bunch of cells, I was a single cell, yeah. Before I was a single cell, I could have been anything, but I chose to manifest as all of this energy. Lately on the daily, I try to get my mind right. Constantly distracted, I'm blinded by the bright future that's ahead of me, so I live in the clouds and forget the now me or make the future me proud. If I just let go of what anyone thinks of me, simply step into a role that has been meant for me, meant to be doing what I'm doing as this entity, mentally in tune with the signals that are sent to me. Salute the conditions permitting of life. So nice that I have to say it twice. I salute the condition permitting of life. So nice that I have to say it twice.
It's like jumping out of a plane, hoping parachute will open and having an idea where you want to land, but you never know actually if you hit the landing spot or not. That's what running these seminars is like. It's completely freestyled, and I'm glad I landed somewhere near where I was hoping to land in the last session. This time, I'm going to make it even more free. We've got about an hour and 10 minutes left before we're scheduled to finish at 4. So I might open it up to receive what it is you'd like to hear. And instead of leave half an hour at the end for questions, we can just start a dialogue right here and right now. And if there's no questions, I'll just continue speaking on some of the themes we're meant to be covering. But I'm looking forward to also hearing what you would like for me to speak on. During the break, I had a few people come up to me asking me a couple of things that I could potentially touch on. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to start just fielding questions. So have a minute to think about that. Someone came up earlier and said that there's a large proportion of people here who actually have no context of me before having seen the seminar come up on their feed. So they were seeking some background about who is this person and where did you come from and what do you do. So Erfan Daliri is my name, and it was given to me by my Iranian parents who escaped Iran and met in India separately. They were married there. I was born in India. At the time, my father was using theatre and art for social change. And my parents met, fell in love, didn't speak a word, told their parents they want to get married. Their parents arranged for them to get married. And a week or so later, they were married and they went on their way. So from that point, right through to today, they've both been working in social change, community development. My father's worked with indigenous communities. My mother has worked with migrant communities. My father did his PhD in indigenous literacy. My mother is now helping settle refugees who have come out of detention centres. So for myself, my whole life, I've been involved and surrounded by the idea of service to humanity and social change and community development. So naturally, my trajectory was always going to land somewhere in the vicinity of where it is now. My father started festivals when I was young. We used to live in Tasmania, and he started his first festival in Devonport, called the Devonport Cultural Festival, 30-odd years ago. And since then, he's been running festivals pretty much every year in Queensland. So I learned how to run and manage festivals and bring in social change elements through them until about 3 years ago when Atlas and I started working together, and we brought into beingness the idea of New Kind as a social change event, a festival where agents of change can come together to be upskilled through workshops, lectures, and discussion panels to become more effective and efficient agents of change. So if you hadn't heard of New Kind before today, which some of you had answered no to, that's what New Kind is, and that's how I kind of ended up there, using events and festivals for more effective positive change rather than just escapism or entertainment. We program our event with lectures with economists to professionals in early childhood education to permaculturalists to earthship builders to physical trainers. It's a drug and alcohol-free event. It's a plant-based diet. It's run completely on solar power, and it's a zero packaging event as well. We feel that in order to be able to speak about themes of social change, social justice, environment, and sustainability, we have to actually embody it. So from the very beginning, we knew that we had to put in place these principles. So that's pretty much what I do most of my time. Before New Kind, I used to spend more energy on spoken word, and I've toured Australia and the UK and used spoken word to bring about social change until a particularly traumatic experience in my life made me question everything, and I had one of those dark nights of the soul kind of period where I was wondering, what is the point of living if for so many years people have tried to make the world a better place, and yet we're still in the mess that we're in currently? If my parents committed their lives, and hundreds of thousands of people throughout history have committed themselves to trying to make positive social change, why is the world in the state that it is in still today? And in that state of trauma that I was and questioning everything, I put the question out there again. And just like I asked you earlier to imagine that there might just be a conscious observer of your existence, in that moment, I just said, maybe someone can hear me. And I said, if you don't tell me what it is I'm meant to do to actually make things better, then I'm going to end it right here. Give me a clue. Give me an idea. How can we be more effective than we have been in the past? Because if I don't see a way through here, if I don't find a glimmer of hope that there is reason to continue, I'm going to end it here in this cabin in Tasmania. And after 3 days of crying and praying and crying and praying and not really eating very much or sleeping very much, on the fourth morning I woke up and the words came to me. Just as I woke up without having to think about anything else, because I didn't really care about anything in that state. I didn't care about bills, I didn't care about family, relationships, nothing. Everything had been taken away from me. So I woke up like a clear blank slate. And I just said, activate the others. Masterclasses. And within an instant, it all came to me. Like I didn't have to think about it. It was just like, yep. In one split second, I knew masterclasses, workshops, help prepare and support those who are already doing what you're doing. You don't need to change everything yourself. It's not your responsibility. But there's others out there who are trying their utmost, and you need to be able to help and prepare them and support them and assist them and inspire them. And that was about 3 years ago. And that's how we ended up here. I legitimately wanted to end it there. And it's really hard to explain what the feeling is like, because the day before that, I had furthered myself. I had distanced myself from the idea that there might be a conscious observer of my existence. And it was that blow that put me back in a state where I had no option. I was like, I'm either going to end it or I'm going to get an answer, or there's this one last final hope that there might be somebody who can hear me and respond. And when we do, it's beautiful. It's glorious. You can't explain it. You can't express it to anyone else. It's a full-bodied experience, of reassurance, of trust, that feeling of being held. And it's happened on many occasions. So I remind myself on these days, when I'm in that state again, or even getting anywhere near it, I remind myself that regardless of how someone responds to my presence, regardless of how I might annoy certain people by trying to be proactive in social change, regardless of how men might dislike the fact that I'm really here to destabilize the patriarchy, regardless of what is thrown at me, there is a witness, there is a reason, there is a purpose. And the purpose is not what I had thought it was. It wasn't to create utopia. It wasn't necessarily to make it all okay and to stop everything that's harmful and to live in a blissful place where we can just dance and eat fruit and play the mandolin. The reason is evolution, progress, to create a situation that the friction causes us to develop. We as conscious beings have a choice to do that. Nature does not have a choice. It does not have any free will. It might have some level of consciousness. You know what I mean? Like tea leaves will disperse a certain chemical within them to make them taste more bitter when they're disturbed. So there's some level of physiology there, there's a certain level of consciousness within it, but it doesn't have free will. It can't consciously remove its roots and walk somewhere else. But it is still part of the collective. It still maintains some level of consciousness to it. We have the free will to decide how quickly or slowly we want to evolve. Inevitably, we will evolve. It's just a matter of whether we're the front runners, the middle, or the laggards. as a civilization, we cannot help but to evolve. And in the blink of an eye that we have on this earth, it's sometimes difficult to see how much progress we have made, because it really is a blink of an eye. But we have evolved. And the issues that we are now dealing with that are causing us heartache are issues that we weren't even capable of comprehending even just 50 years ago. Imagine how the first people who came to the awareness that we shouldn't be using animals as commodities would have felt 100 years ago when it first came to them. It's only 100 years ago. We've been here for thousands, millions of years evolving. It's always going to be like that. We're always going to be looking at where we are, seeing how we can better it as a civilization and as an individual, and trying to better it, evolve it. And that's what our free will allows us to do. And someone asked me earlier, how do we find the hope to continue when it feels like it might be a lost battle? The truth is, it's not really a battle to be won or lost. It's a process that needs to be witnessed and engaged with. It's not a war. It's a process. When we acknowledge that it's a process and there is no end in sight, there is no end at which we can say we no longer need to evolve from here. Just like an individual cannot at any point in their life say, I don't need to better myself. There's no way in which I can further extend myself in any direction. Just like the universe continues to expand, so too can we. And so too can we evolve. When we come to peace with that, then the process itself becomes less painful. The trauma that we've gone through, the heartache that we've gone through, whether it was in our childhood, in our youth, or in our current present moment, becomes less painful to deal with. We recognize, we attach a different emotion to the very same sensation. I heard someone recently speak about some of the effects of having experienced sexual violence as a child, and how sexual pleasure and shame and pain and all these things become connected together, and it's really hard to disentangle it unless you're facilitated through that process, and it takes years, decades. But that's just an idea of how a sensation gets connected to any emotion, depending on what that context is, and we can create new connections. So that process, like when you're in the gym, and that pain that you're feeling, we connect that with something that's good. Like, cool, I'm growing here. I'm able to lift more weights today. And the next day when you got a bit of tightness, you connect that with something that's good as well. We need to do the same thing with the emotional stuff that we're going through and recognize that, cool, this is growth. This is an opportunity for me to learn something. This is an opportunity for me to become bigger, better, more compassionate. Anytime someone throws anything at us, aware, consciously or unconsciously, viciously or just completely obliviously, it's another opportunity for us to further develop our emotional state. When we come to that realization, the process becomes joyful. We connect different emotions to the same experience. We heal, we help others to heal, and we become content with the current state that we're in while continuing to move towards the vision that we see in our minds. And that's how we find the hope to continue when the battle seems to be lost, when we disempower the battle, when we unplug it, remove the charge, realize there is no battle, it's just a process to be witnessed and experienced. That's how I find the strength to continue. I think I answered the 2 or 3 questions that I was asked to speak on, so I'm going to open it up to questions and just see where we go from here. So, is there anything anyone would like me to speak on in particular? Yes? Yeah. Okay. The breath work that Amy started with, that's the most important one. So, do I have any practical, implementable techniques that I might implement in order to do that physical exertion of emotional core strength stuff? The breath work was my response, is one of the key things. There's a certain number of days we can go without food, there's a certain number of days we can go without water, a certain number of hours we can go without sleep, but there's only a very small period of time we can go without breathing. It's very tightly interwoven into our existence for a very specific reason. Like our physiology is designed for it to take in food at certain times, to allow things to process, to digest and go out and excrete and give us energy and all the rest of it. Breath is part of that. There's a reason for it. Just like there's a reason why you cannot replace sleep with anything else. It's for the soul to be removed from the body, to become at peace again, to remember things that it had forgotten, and to come back into this form. Breath is a similar thing, but because it's so important, it's woven into our existence much tighter than sleep. We need to do it even more often than sleep. So conscious breath is one of the most important things to do. And if you do it consciously in that moment when you're triggered, the first thing we do, we say it all the time, take a deep breath, but when you actually connect it up with what Amy's talking about, you realize it literally is removing things out of you when you do it consciously. And when you're aware of the fact that that's what you're about to do, it's actually more effective. So it's not just to calm your physiology down and come to something. It's very, very, very real. That is the first step. So to remain calm and breathe through it allows you to take in the blow or take in the emotions that are triggered by the thought you've just had and let it go. And get the stuff out that you need to get out so that you have more energy to offer a solution or a way forward. So let's start with that. Yes. Meditation. Bring yourself to account each day, in the morning and in the evenings. So in the mornings, we should begin our days with it. If we're too busy to meditate for 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes in a day, we shouldn't really be doing anything else at all. We really need to stop. Just whoa. You don't have 15 minutes to spare or half an hour to spare in the full 24-hour cycle. There's something very, very wrong there. And it's difficult to begin with because that state that we're brought into, when the thoughts dissipate, we're just left with the emotions. And we try and avoid it sometimes. And we sew in complications into our life, like I was mentioning earlier, just to keep ourselves busy so we don't need to deal with the emotional stuff. So meditation forces us to go there, to remove the thoughts and to really be present with what's going on physiologically in the body and be aware of the emotions we're feeling. So yes, it's difficult to begin with, but it's super crucial. If we're not checking in with ourselves on a daily basis before we begin our day, and then at the end of the day, we're doing something very, very wrong. And that's just the beginning of it. Half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, it's like you eat 3 times a day, you usually go to the toilet once or twice a day, you do so many different things, and yet we neglect that. So definitely, meditation. And the more we do that, the more we can return ourselves to a meditative state during the day. There is no point whatsoever in being able to meditate and breathe and be calm and loving and then leave the house and to be triggered in an instant and then spend the rest of the day annoyed, angry, bitter, blah, blah, blah. There's no point. The whole point of meditation is to be able to carry that practice throughout the day until you get to your evening and you meditate again and you wrap up your day, you reflect on what's just happened, your learnings, your betterings, all the rest of it. If you can meditate in the morning and in the evening, but then forget about it in the day, we've missed the point. The point is to be able to enact that process throughout the day and to return ourselves instantaneously to a meditative state whenever something triggers us, until we get to a point where the spaces between the meditations decrease, the length of the meditation increases, and eventually it connects up, and you exist in a meditative state. That is one of the highest goals we can potentially aim for, is to live our existence in a state of peacefulness. Yes? My motivation to be of effective use. That's what helped me. Yes. So I came to the realization that in order for me to actually be of any help, it really has to sink in. Just like the medical emergency situation, when we meditate on that idea over and over again, it finally sinks in. It's triggering me, but because I so badly want it to stop, I have to stay calm with it. And it's a matter of interrupting the signal that goes through the brain, and each time you do it, it becomes easier to interrupt it, until which point you no longer are triggered the way you were. It still triggers you somewhere. It still pushes you. it powers you through, but it doesn't make you see red. There was a moment, I remember one night I called Atlas. I was in Tasmania, he was in Sydney, and I'd heard about this speaker from the US who was this coming to Australia to meet up with his online fans. You know who I'm talking about, right? Some people might know. I don't even want to bring him up, his name or what he was here to talk about. But all I wanted to do was get myself to Sydney, find him, and end his life. And I thought, if I can achieve that, then at least I've done something. But I realized, actually, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have done the cause of feminism any good. I wouldn't have done the cause of ending violence any good, because I would have been enacting violence. I would have disempowered myself and anyone else who wanted to end such a thing. And Atlas was able to calm me down. He's like, look at how much energy you're just putting into your anger right now, into your rage right now for this person. That's going to work you up. You've just spent hours reading up about this person, finding article to article, links and backstory, and you've just spent 3 hours planning out how you're going to end this person's life, when if you'd been meditating, you could have come to a solution to potentially have more sustainable long-term change. So every time that happened, I would try and remind myself of how badly I want to address that issue, and I would force myself to not act out until a clearer pathway was shown to me. So just that, remind yourself that, yes, I'm feeling something, but if I can breathe through this and meditate and keep looking at it, then something will come to me that will help me to address the issue. It's not that we have to stop feeling, we still have to feel. And that's what the whole point of resilience is to still feel it and to keep that open and super sensitive so that we are aware of the finer details of existence. Before I came to a certain level of awareness, a little while ago, it took a big, heavy thud to make me feel anything. Because of experiences of trauma in the past, I'd layered myself up, and I wasn't sensitive to the finer details, the finer wavelengths of existence. So it would take a big thud to make me feel anything, joy or grief. And eventually, when you get smacked open, I don't know, maybe it was just sheer fluke, but I realized that I had a heightened awareness. I was navigating existence in a way that I hadn't before, because I was aware of things I wasn't aware of before. So it's important to be able to stay there, to not shut yourself off so you don't feel anything, but to feel the pain. And just like you've got phlegm in your lungs, just get it out. Get it out. Cry, grieve, weep, pray, meditate, sit with it, get it out, constantly, every day if you have to. We've all got a lot of backlog to begin with, stuff that's been happening over decades sometimes. And it's sitting in there, and if we're still identifying that or allowing that to sit in us, we're constantly going to be triggered from it and acting from that. So if we clear ourselves out, dust our hearts out, we'll be able to remain calm while looking at things that used to traumatize us and make us see red. Yes. I don't. Question is, when I'm helping people through trauma, how do I hold healthy boundaries between myself and a potential client or whatever? I don't actually do that work. So I'm not a counselor or a psychologist. I'm not a grief expert. So I don't often find myself in those situations. I don't do one-on-one work. I do workshops, but most of my workshops are about social change, activation, empowerment, and how to do further work. So I don't actually do one-on-one sessions. So I'm probably not the right person to ask about the boundaries between clients. Yeah. Yeah. As an empathetic being, one of the things I learned was that when someone is grieving or weeping, we oftentimes try to make it okay straight away, and that often cuts off the grieving process. So we'll get worked up with them, or we'll pat them. Like my dad used to do it a lot. Like he wouldn't know how to help someone, so he'd just pat them. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay, and it doesn't help because it stops the process. So being able to maintain that state of non-triggering, like non-triggered state, allows you to be present with that, allow them to express that, and get it out there, and just bear witness. That helps someone actually get more out than if we were to weep with them, or if we were to help, or if we were to try and make it stop. Something I realized is that when someone's crying, you can make them stop crying if you start crying. I've done this before. I've tried it. Whether it's children or adults. Like, I've tried it with kids, and when there's a 3-year-old crying, if I start crying, they'll stop. At a funeral, if I remain still and calm, I allow others to grieve. The minute I start like losing my nut, someone else will stop and they'll come and support me. So I try and allow people to go through whatever they need to go through without trying to stop it, or without trying to interrupt their grieving for my own. And then later I'll do my own grieving, my own privacy.
What's your dad's name?
Dad's name is Farvardin. Hey, Dad. Yes, so for those of you who don't realize, we're actually live. This whole seminar has been live on Facebook. Yeah. No protection here. It's just like completely raw. It's being filmed, you're live, and everyone's watching online as well. Any other questions? Yes?
I've noticed as I've become more liberated myself.
Yep.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, it's a fact. It happens all the time. Because we put people in a position where they are more aware of ways in which they can extend themselves and grow. So as I've upset people simply by not eating cake in the office because it's got dairy in it. And I'll offend them because, I'm not eating the going away cake for Sarah because I don't eat dairy. And that brings something that they've been trying to keep away from their awareness to their awareness, like, this person is a vegan, for example. And that will cause them to respond somehow. And if they're really conflicted within themselves, they will react negatively towards you. So if you're doing that, you're not necessarily doing anything bad. You're actually allowing people to see parts of themselves that they would like to evolve. Yeah. Especially when it's just you being you, like you're not, you're not preaching at people's faces, you're not going door knocking, you're just living your own life sometimes, and you're just like refusing to partake in something, and that's enough to trigger people. So in those situations, definitely I would say just be you and help them evolve by just holding your line, and don't go out there intentionally trying to trigger people. The Anonymous for the Voiceless crew, that a few members are here, they are some of the most effective vegan activists out there, and what they do is they just stand on the streets, hold up TV screens, showing what happens in dairy farms and slaughterhouses. That's it. And they're wearing their masks so people can watch without feeling like they're looking at someone's face. And then if you want to have a conversation, there's people on an outer circle just standing there watching with you, and if you like, you can have a conversation with them. So it's in public, but it's not in your face. And if anyone's feeling offended by what they're showing, the fact of the matter is our money is paying for that to happen. So if that bothers you, then we really need to look at that, because we're actually implicit in that act. And if it's not okay for public viewing, then it shouldn't be happening, full stop. And that's the kind of activism I like, is to hold your line, be yourself, and if it triggers people, so be it. You're helping them. Yourself and then you.
It occurred to me that it might be a nice thing to
Sure. What's your motivation for asking that question? You're a bit hungover. Awesome. So the question was, can I speak on the impact or influence of drugs and alcohol and its connection to emotional resilience? Some of you might know what this X means. Does anyone know what it means? How many do? A very small proportion of people. Okay, cool. So this X is a representation of the straight edge movement, which started as a counterculture movement within the punk rock movement of the 80s. So within punk rock, there was a lot of violence and alcohol abuse, drug abuse, even glue sniffing, and just general misbehavior. Within that culture, there was this growing kind of sentiment and emotion towards like being clean, living clean. And it was already there. And it happens often in life when there is an extreme of one side, like a lotus flower coming out of dirty water, there always happens to be a counter to everything. And the straight edge movement was initiated when one particular band, Minor Threat, coined the term straight edge. And that meant that they refrained from drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, any intoxicants or addictive behaviors, materials, and espoused a clean living life. I was smoking for many years and I wasn't able to call myself straight edge, even though for most of my life I didn't touch drugs, alcohol, cigarettes or anything, until last year when I finally managed to put the cigarettes aside. And as soon as I did, to remind myself, I tattooed these onto myself. For me, the realizations that came to me when I stopped smoking were some of the most profound realizations I have ever had. It felt like I'd come out of a coma, a 15-year coma. And I used to think that when I hadn't had a cigarette for a few hours, or in the mornings when I was grumpy, I needed the nicotine hit to address my addiction. And that's why I was grumpy, or short-tempered, or aggressive. Fact of the matter is, that was my natural state. And the cigarettes were just covering it up. That's all it was. The cigarettes were removing me from my heart, making me more heady. I was less sensitive to emotional stuff. I used to write some pretty fantastic philosophy and poetry when I'd have a few coffees and half a dozen cigarettes. I'd write some epic stuff, but emotionally, I was closing myself off because it was so painful. And I was acting out in between those cigarettes because I was hurt. And things that had happened when I was 5, 10, 15, 20, things that I thought I'd dealt with, I actually hadn't. And I was just using the cigarettes to cover up everything that was going on. Someone else might use alcohol. Someone else might use sex. Someone else might use gambling. Someone else might use work. But addictions of all kinds are generally covering something up. It's not the thing you're addicted to, it's the other thing that you're running away from that's often the problem. So alcohol and cigarettes and drugs, which you just specifically asked about, I think they're two different things, actually. So I'll mention the drugs separately. The alcohol and cigarettes are oftentimes covering up things we don't want to feel and slowing down our progress, or oftentimes just halting it and suppressing things we don't want to deal with. The drugs, I believe that they do potentially open up certain doorways into certain realities, and they do allow us to recognize or witness certain truths in certain moments. But it's also shortcutting your journey, the spiritual realization of awakening. It's like pumping 24,000 volts through a system that was only designed to take 4,000 volts through the system at any given point. We're meant to go through this process of self-realization slowly and gradually, like the art stuff, so we can memorize it, embody it, and know how we got there. Some of the drugs we take shortcut that and take us right there, and they give us this glimpse of this glorious existence that we really, really, really want to be a part of. And because we didn't do the work to get ourselves there, we continue to use the drug to get ourselves there. And though there might not be an obvious negative impact the first time you use it, it's a slow and gradual decay of the capacities of the mind that may only be apparent to others outside of you over the process of 20 years. But to the individual, because the development or lack of or degradation is slow and gradual, we don't often recognize it. And you're pumping in high voltage, trying to shortcut yourself to a realization that we're meant to actually take on really slowly. So that's the drugs and the alcohol discussed separately for you. Yes, you, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, brother. Uh-huh. Right, cool. So I'll repeat the question, you let me know if I'm getting it right. So how do we balance or come to terms with the fact that of letting go of the things that we really wanted or that we've identified with and living in a culture that's very much based on that sort of stuff, yeah? Yeah, cool. So how do we let go of the things that we've craved for, yearned for, and desired when our entire culture is based around that, of want and need and desire and pleasure and all the rest of it? Who was it that said, Krishnamurti? Was it him who said this thing that I'm about to say? You know what I'm about to say. It's no sign of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. It is no sign of health to be well-adjusted, to a profoundly sick society. That was Krishnamurti. And that's my answer. We have to recognize that our culture, our society is sick. It is void of spirituality for the most part. As a collective culture, it is morally bankrupt. We are living in rape culture. Like our relationship with animals, our relationship with the environment and the earth, the overpowering and suppression of slaves, of women, it's all connected to the idea of rape culture. Our entire civilization is either practicing this or benefiting from this. The fact that we live on this land in Australia is a direct result of rape. In the actual sense of white settlers raping indigenous people, but also of the land, of taking something away from someone because you could overpower them, of harnessing nature and taking its resources for our own use. So our society is very, very, very sick. And that's how I let go of the things that society has told me to do. Because I don't want to touch that. And that's how I come to terms with it. So the ideas of want and need and desire are what, for a large part, have caused us to act like this. And we have somehow, just like we connected up pain and joy and pleasure with shame and sex through a very traumatic experience, we've also somehow connected desire with love. And we throw love at people, like throw desire at people, expecting them to desire us back, thinking that that's love when it's not. And we need to differentiate between these two. We need to sift these two out from each other. Desire is want. It can be damaging. It can be devastating to want something so badly. And a lot of our trauma, a lot of our pain comes from the gap between reality and our expectations of what we want and what we actually have. And the further away the bigger that gap is, the more pain we go through. So letting go of desire, of want, of ideas of need, and feelings of lack is a big part of the process for me. And when Atlas was just speaking about, hold that idea in your head, the thing you really most wanted, and let go of it, there's a lot of things that come up. There's little ones and then bigger ones and then even bigger ones, and then sometimes the big ones come back. And for me, it was the idea of a family and home and children. That was the one thing that caused me the most pain. That was the one thing that I wanted the most from the youngest age I can think of. And the fact that I never had that thing was what caused me the pain, desire. But when you let go of that and you realize that it's actually the having of that is in no way connected to the reality of your existence, and that the very idea of want and desire is actually what's causing much of the damage here on this earth, it's easier to let go of those things we were expected to want. Is that a good enough answer? Yeah, cool. Ballpark is good for me. Was there another one that I forgot about? Oh, that's right, you.
Mine was inspired by your speaking about drugs.
Yeah.
So drugs, how some boys are using that to do the work.
Yep. I have I have a very strong conviction that medicine is medicine, and plant-based medicines do exist, but self-medicating is not something that I condone. So though microdosing of MDMA might help war veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, that does not give me the right to pack bongs every weekend. They're two different things. And oftentimes the people who are trying to justify the use of drugs for medicinal purposes and for healing, just trying to justify their own actions and how they live their lives. Hemp oil, for example, marijuana itself, they, just like we have people who spend their lives investigating how to have surgery on the heart or how to fix a broken leg, there's people who know how to dose this stuff out correctly, and there is a use for it. My stance on drugs is the same as my stance on guns. And if we can think about the gun laws of the US, it's like, yes, some people know how to use them responsibly. And they might have need for them on their farms or ranches or whatever. They might be hunters, and that's okay for them to hunt. It's not okay for me, but we might justify it. But the overwhelming majority of people in the States are being harmed by gun use. And the overwhelming number of times those guns are used are actually causing unnecessary deaths. And until which point we get to a place where we can maturely use those guns, take them away. And then have people register to have their guns. Have people trained. Those who need them have to have them. And so I feel the same way about drugs as well. Like, we don't need to be messing around with stuff that we're actually not aware of what we're doing until we have the maturity to actually use them correctly. Yes? Sure. Yeah. My insight, okay, cool. What is my insight on how to fill a room like this? Is that what you asked?
Correct.
Cool. We are less nervous when we believe in what we speak about. We are more believable as well when we genuinely believe what we're saying. So when we're giving a wedding speech, for example, if we tap into how we're feeling and we're not ashamed to actually express how we're truly feeling, there should never be any nerves. But when we're trying to make up things of like how to impress that person who's in the audience that we want to impress, or how do I say the right things because of the context that I'm in, we become nervous because we're spending a lot of energy trying to come up with something that may or may not necessarily be true. But when we actually legitimately don't care what the response is, and all we're doing is speaking truth, then the nerves dissipate. And we don't spend any energy trying to make up stories. So that's about stage presence, for example. So if someone is caught up in how something will be received, there will be a lack of authenticity there. There will be energy going to nerves that could be going to connection. And then when you keep doing that, and you let go of how it might be received, or let go of any ego stuff that might be coming up about why you're doing it, then it's felt. Just like I was saying earlier about how what we feel inside, we cannot hide. Like, we think that we feel emotions inside, and that if we don't speak about it, no one else will know. It's not true. We all know exactly what's going on in here. And the less we try and suppress our own emotions and our own traumas, the more aware we become of that. And we are actually able to engage with people intuitively and be very aware of what they're carrying. But even when we're suppressing it, even when we're using drugs, alcohol, and keeping ourselves busy, it's still within us. We respond to energies. So when you are fully aligned, when your actions are fully aligned with your words, you carry a certain authenticity with you, and that affects and influences people. So animal rights, for example. I've spoken with like RSPCA workers who aren't vegan. Like, they're trying to like rescue dogs from cages, but they still eat meat and dairy. And you can't sit through an hour-long lecture with one of them, because like there's this massive gap between what they're saying they believe in, but what they're actually doing. But the closer that becomes together, and the more aligned it is, the more it will be felt on an energetic level, and the more ease with which it will actually flow. I genuinely let go about mid-last year, any need for anything almost. Like I used to run workshops and seminars a couple of years ago, and I would have a set fee on it. And I'd be like, yep, it's like $80 for a session, and you come in for 4 hours, and we have a workshop with 10 people. And I was caught up in head stuff. I was trying to like make a living out of running workshops, and I was trying to impress people. I was trying to live up to expectations. And then late last year, I just realized, you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm going to make the workshops free for anyone who wants to attend. Anyone who wants to pay something can pay something. And I actually don't care how it's received. I didn't even care to promote it even. Like I put the least amount of effort into anything into the promotion of the first Unfazed seminar that I did in Melbourne a few months back. And there was 300 people in this room. It was because I just let go of all the ego stuff.
Please talk a little bit more about how you can find in yourself whether you're acting from a place of ego or from...
Expectations. The ego has expectations, the soul doesn't care. So the less we have expectations of the outcome of something, the less we are identifying with the ego. But if we're really like tightly holding on to how it should turn out, that's connected to a whole like maze of other story stuff that's going on. But when you do something on a stage and you don't care how it comes out, then the ego is less engaged in that state, and it's more enjoyable to watch and to witness. So yeah, that's how I would know. If I'm caught up with what the outcome is going to be, then I'll know that there's still stuff going on. And that's pretty much how I prepare myself for like running something like this. I'll sit in the room there, and for 15 minutes, I'll just remind myself of how, like literally, I've got nothing to prove. There is nothing that I want or need, and I just want to be able to be of service. And so let me speak what I need to speak. So when I let go of all of my expectations and wants, I'm more calm, and I'm able to be of more service. So yeah, letting go of expectation. Yes, yourself, and then you. What time? Sorry, before you go, what time have we got so I can leave? 3:40, cool. So we'll take those 2 questions and one other maybe.
So this is a little bit about outcomes,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering about continuing our work and networking.
Mhm.
Big
Okay. So the question is, what do I say about, or do I propose a solution for potentially networking and collaborating with people? Because there's an awareness that there are certain people here with certain skills and qualities, and how do we continue that connection? Is that what you're asking?
we support each other,
How can we support each other more?
maintain connection.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to give you an answer that you probably wouldn't have been expecting at all. And that's to say that the need or desire or want to have that community is counterproductive. And the reason why I run seminars like this is for us to be able to go out there without that physical community or without that physical connection, because a lot of the time we won't have that. And setting up Facebook groups or monthly meetups or church groups or whatever it might be doesn't serve the purpose. It's not there more times than it actually is there. So they're very minute slices of our life. The trick is to not need it. To be able to go out there and to open that door, like squeeze it right open and have that same connection that you're having with people here, with people out there. To force it with a crowbar, open it up and hold people's gaze on a train or a tram, and to not close yourself off, to lift your gaze, to clear your stuff out and walk out there with a little bit more courage and bravery, so that you don't need to have an actual physical community to interact with, and you can feel that with anyone. That's the trick. And meditation would give you that strength. Yes, definitely. There was one other, but there you are.
I wanted to ask you about burnout. This is something to avoid, obviously.
Yes?
But, yeah, what's your advice?
Surrender. That's my answer to burnout. And whenever I get to a point where I think I'm just going to like end it, my life or the project or whatever it is, I have to surrender. Burnout comes when we are forcing something, or we have a great deal of expectations on the outcome of what we're doing. So environmentalists who are trying to save the whales or the Amazon, or animal rights activists who want to end all meat and dairy industries, the expectation, the want, the desire, again, to have that thing instantaneously is what causes the burnout, because that's what is a burnout? Like a car burnout, you're standing still, your wheels are spinning. That's what I think of when I think of burnout, because we want to be elsewhere, but we're here expending energy. When you let go of expectations and you recognize that the important part is the process of your own evolution and the slow and gradual evolution of others, and that the goal that you have set for yourself is something that might not even happen in our lifetime, the chances of burnout decrease until which they get to a point where they're just not there anymore. And we surrender ourselves. Connecting back to your question about ego, and how do we know we're coming from a place of ego or not, is the idea of expectation. So when we remove expectation, when we remove the desire for the change to happen instantaneously, we're less likely to experience burnout. And just enjoy the process, be witness to the experience. Yes, bro? How do we change the story of self-victimization? It's big. It's big. Our identity the story that we identify with is the greatest of all addictions. More than drugs, more than alcohol, more than everything else. As I mentioned earlier, the story is that one part of us that we have control over. It's the one part that we craft meticulously. And we feel like we have some sense of control in this completely absurd, ever-changing, endless universe. To calm ourselves down, we meticulously craft the story of ourselves. So it becomes a very, very strong addiction. And we keep referring back to it, and it's really hard to break that addiction. And when we remind ourselves that it's just an addiction, and that you will continue to exist beyond the story, it's oftentimes easier to let go, just lightly, slightly, let go of stories, bit by bit, and let it fall away. But through the process, it's good to constantly remind yourself that I will exist, I have always existed before this story, after this story, through this story, there is a different entity, and that I don't need to carry this to justify my existence, I don't need to prove myself to anybody, and when I overcome this addiction of referring back to my story, I will actually be free of something that's been holding me back. That's how we let go of it. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Can I share a poem? Thank you for coming today. Really proud of you guys for being here. I don't like giving really long backstories, so I'll make it really short. This particular song just came up on my SoundCloud feed one day, and it just broke me. I was going through a particularly painful experience, a breakup, which is more painful when the other person doesn't even think it's a breakup. That makes it even worse. You're like, okay, so I'm alone in this. So it's a very alone, solitary period for me, and this song came on and it just broke me, and I bawled my eyes out, and I just cried and I grieved and let go of a lot of stuff, and then I thought it was out of me, and then I heard it again the next day, and it did it again. And I heard it the next day, did it again, and each time I heard it, it kept coming out of me, and I'm like, geez, when is this going to stop? And eventually I thought I need to, while I've got this going on here, I shouldn't just grieve and let it go. I'm going to try and get some of it into words. Because we can cry and grieve and let go of all of it, or if we can hold our composure, we might just come up with a piece of art to express parts of what we're feeling that might help someone else heal. So eventually, after about 15 or 20 times of just crying and just trying to not drop to the floor, I started writing, and still tears were streaming so much that I had to stop to be able to see the page. And I'm really, really happy with the fact that I was able to do that, and I would like to recommend that to everyone. When we are feeling those things, try and rehearse your art practice when you're not feeling that, whether it's your dance or your poetry or your painting. When you rehearse those practices, just like sport, when you know your cover drive from your late cut, then when you need it, you can access it really quickly. And that's why art practice is really important to me. So in those situations, when you don't have your full wits about you, it becomes part of your muscle memory, and you can write or dance or sing to express something that you wouldn't have been able to get out otherwise. To be honest, I don't know where we have come from. And I don't know where we go when our time here is done. And in all the time I've been here, no one's been able to tell me what I'm actually meant to be doing with my time. So eventually I decided that if no one can give me a straight answer as to the purpose of my life, then the least I can do is to live it like it was actually mine. So tell me, are you living a life you would like to relive, my love? I don't care much for the stories that have been written in the past, for they were written by less skillful writers, less interesting practitioners of life. And until someone can show me what unconditional love truly looks like, I'm going to keep searching for it the way I like, without consideration for my safety, my state of mind, or even my life. I'm going to search the 7 seas in the dust and the mud, at dawn, at dusk, and in the middle of the night, because I want to learn how to fly. and I want to learn how to love. And I don't have time to take the advice of those who are too afraid to try. For what worth has this life if we only half-heartedly search for God? If we pretend that love is not actually the most important objective of all? I tell you, the most glorious moments in life come when you continue to love, even when you legitimately think you're going to die or lose your mind. Next to love comes service to humanity. And these two are just as important as your family. For your bleeding heart means nothing to the homeless unless your own home is one of peaceful, loving companionship. Pay attention to dewdrops on blades of grass and to your parents, for both will soon be gone and you will wish to recall them. Be kind to strangers, for we will all meet again when we find our way home. So be patient, my friends. Be noble. And I know I said I don't know where we go to, but I also said that this is my story and I'm going to write it how I want to. Thank you.
So nice that I live life twice. So nice, so nice. So nice that I live life twice. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.